again and welcome to Man in the Wild. Another little special for you this week as we think about an essential for life and the importance of our upland management in its collection, plus the wildlife benefits which can be reaped. So, without further ado, let's get out there and see if we can't find in the first instance Dr. Peter McAvoy from Deffa and Ranger Sean Gelling.
And yes, you can hear we're tramping out into some fairly marshy, watery ground. But we're actually upland. We're not down by the beach or down by the seaside. We're way up on the moorlands again, back of Sartfield Plantation. If you can imagine, if you're driving up to the top of the Druidale Road, go up over the headland there. And I'm very glad that we took Sean Gelling's van up the track, because it's a fairly rough old road and I wouldn't fancy trying to take my car up there. But there's two or three of us today and we shall introduce them in a minute or two. Sean Gelling, the ranger here from Deffa, Dr. Peter McAvoy as well, and if I catch up with them, they're just in front of me. Another gentleman from the Water Authority we shall hear from in a moment or two, and we are talking water and the importance of these areas for water collection. And of course, we all need water. Even if you've got plenty of whiskey. I can't remember the old adage about whiskey and water, but you know what I mean. Why do you need water if you've got plenty of whiskey? The bottom line is, of course, we have to have a great, fortunately we do have a very good supply of water on the Isle of Man, good clean drinking water. But if it wasn't for these sort of areas, which we're squelching through now, then we might not have. And that's what we're going to have a little talk about today, and their importance to wildlife as well. So excuse me for a moment and I'll see if I can't catch them up. It's a bit breezy, but still, it's not snowing, so it could be worse. And as there we are, I managed to catch up with them eventually. I knew I would in the end. They all trump off being professionals on these matters through the uplands, and caught up with Peter. So first off, I was just saying as we were walking up, we've come up here today, back up onto the uplands of the Isle of Man, I suppose you'd call it, and we're thinking sort of water today and the importance of these areas.
Yes, we're right on the edge of the Sulby catchment on the top of Sartfell. We're just walking towards the summit, which is kind of hard to see today in the mist. Yes. And these hills are in fantastic condition, and we've got Gareth Patchett here from the Water Authority who can talk more about how that good condition hill benefits water quality in the Sulby. But what we've got up here is a bit of a lesson to learn, really, in that there was a catastrophic fire a number of decades ago, and when we get there you'll see the devastation that it can create on this peatland habitat.
And of course we've been around these areas before, and I suppose it's also a great area when it comes to the biodiversity on the Isle of Man. It's not only just for water collection, but important in so many other ways for the island as well.
It's fantastic, this peatland habitat, and there's lots of wet pools and things. We've already seen a couple of blue hares, so if we keep the eyes peeled, they've started to turn colour already, so we've got a nice white tinge to them.
Aha! So yes, it's gorgeous animals, fairly evasive, but they do turn into their white coats at this time of the year, regardless of whether we get the snow or not, although chances are these upland areas are going to see a covering of white at some stage over the next few months, so they'll be well camouflaged. But come what may, I think the temperature pretty much triggers their change in any case, or the length of the day, and they go into their white coats. So more of that in a minute. And here we have tromped on a bit, and we're up into a slightly more barren landscape here towards the top of the hill there, Peter.
Yeah, so right on the summit of Sartfell, and what ostensibly looks like the surface of the moon here.
I was just thinking that it's very lunar, isn't it? Totally.
Yeah. And what has happened is a number of decades ago there was a very hot fire that burned into the peat and took it right down to this slate beneath us, which is the very surface of the hills. And it's a really great illustration of what can go wrong when a hill is badly managed. And if we look to our left, we see a really great profile of what the hill used to look like. We've got maybe 1.5 feet of peat sitting proud of the ground. That used to clothe this whole top of the hill. It was covered in vegetation. It would have been very wet. It would have stored thousands of tons of carbon, and that has all disappeared as a result of being burned. And that has all run down the hill and ultimately into the reservoir and into the rivers and into the sea.
And so even though this was, as you say, decades ago now, this doesn't or can't really regenerate in a short period then?
No, peatlands have taken thousands of years to form, and the climatic conditions that they formed in were very different to what we have now. So you can see this is maybe 4 decades worth of regeneration, and apart from little bits of grass on places where the peat remained, there's nothing has grown back. And we have an exclosure behind us to see if fencing out sheep and hares would be of any benefit, and we can go and look at that, but it's equally as barren on the inside. So it is a valuable lesson as to what can go wrong with our uplands.
And if we just have a little stroll down here and we take a look at this little bank, you can hear if we scrunch through this, as we say, lunar landscape realistically, and come down to this area here, which, as Peter says, is probably 1.5 feet, 2 feet deep, and you've got a lot of so this is what it would have been like hitherto.
Yeah, and I guess it's important to note that the average rate of peat formation on a healthy peat bog is about 1 millimetre a year.
God,
so
tiny. That is tiny.
So there are thousands of years worth of accumulation of peat, which is essentially little bits of plant and moss fragments, but that is gone in a couple of days burning. So thousands of years gone in days.
And that's incredible, and I suppose an awful lot of people just wouldn't think about that. You take the peatlands here for granted on the Isle of Man. You just think, well, they've been there, they're always there. In a way, people go over them, they enjoy walking on them. They're used for all sorts of different uses, recreational or otherwise, grazing and such like, wildlife and biodiversity, of course. And yet, as you say, it can all go in a matter of a couple of days, and that's it. Thousands of years lost in hours.
Correct, yeah. And it's easy to take it completely for granted. And they do exist in good condition because of the farmers who graze off any vegetation that is a fire risk. The guys who shoot the grouse, they manage the heather, which keeps the fire risk down as well and keeps the whole place in good nick and reduces the risk of this happening.
Incredible, really. So we'll stroll on up a little bit, as you're suggesting, towards that other area which has been fenced off, and take a look at that and see if it's made any difference. And we'll just walk this way. And here we go, just coming up to the fence here. So Sean Gelling's here as well, coming up, walking up. So this area has been fenced off just to see what difference it makes if you keep out the likes of the hares and such like.
Yeah, that's right. It was, I think it was done in the early 90s, but you can see it was just been done with stock fence. So essentially, it's only excluding the sheep. And as you know, there's quite a lot of mountain hares in this area, so it's probably not the ideal scenario for excluding all grazing animals, but you can see it's not made a great deal of difference excluding the animals from vegetation wise.
No, it doesn't. If we look out just across, and there's this area just in front of us at the moment. It's swathed in mist, as indeed we all are around here at the moment, and an area, I don't know, maybe the size of a football pitch or so, something like that, with the fencing around it. But if I just come and look forward on the other side of the fence here, is there any great difference? Realistically, you'd have to say no. There's perhaps a little bit more greenery just towards the centre of the area there, but other than that, you have this vast lunar landscape again, rocky shale, a little bit of sort of low scrub, not much else. It certainly hasn't regenerated in any meaningful way, I guess. So will this be kept fenced off then, or is it a case of looking at it and in essence sort of saying, well, it's made no odds anyway?
Well, yeah, probably. I don't know if it'd be replaced, but at the moment the grazing tenant's not really losing any grazing by being excluded from here. I suppose it was interesting to see. I think it's probably important to say that if there was a will and money, this probably could be partially restored, but as it stands, as we're very lucky that we haven't had many of these very damaging fires,
Absolutely.
It's probably adding a bit of diversity to the environment up here. It's probably quite good on hot days for basking lizards, and just as they're warming up in the morning, certainly could be good for insects. Towards the autumn, early winter, there's often big flocks of golden plover up here, which, whilst they're not overly rare on the Isle of Man, we don't see them in the hills that much, and they like the open landscape. I think they're a bird of the open tundra, so it seems to suit them here.
So I suppose that's another way. That's a good way of looking at it, seeing as the glass half full. And obviously, on the one hand, as you say, you wouldn't want to see this sort of devastation caused on a regular basis, but if it's only once every several generations that this happens on a relatively small area, it can, in its own way, as you say, add to, I suppose again, all add to the fact that you can help increase biodiversity by having this totally different habitat.
Yeah, that would appear to be the case, and for some odd reason the hares always seem to be drawn here. I don't know whether it's because as you're walking across the hill they're gradually sneaking off in front of you, and then certainly in the winter I think they feel safe here because we've got so many big lumps of exposed quartz, white rocks lying around about the place. You can quite often walk up here and all of a sudden realise you're stood amongst a dozen or more hares, so yeah, it's quite different, it's varied. It's not ideal, but it's what we've got and we can live with it, I think.
Got to go with it.
Yeah.
And we're just talking about hares, and you were mentioning them on the way up. So we're talking in this instance, so this is blue hares or mountain hares?
Yeah, mountain hares, yeah. There's probably some overlap with the brown hare further down the hills, but certainly up the tops here you'll only see the blue hares. And this is probably, of all our hills at the moment, it consistently got on the highest densities. It's not as high as it was in the past, but it's still quite good up here.
And again, well, first off, I know I'm always asked this question. People say, well, how can you tell the difference between a mountain hare and a brown hare? Is there an easy way of doing it?
Yeah, they're smaller. They've got distinct black tips to their ears. They fully grown mountain hares, but probably no more than 2.5 kilos, and the brown hares, it's not uncommon for them on the lower ground, good farmland, to get up towards 5 kilos. So there's quite a difference side by side. Even though they individually look big, especially when they're white, they seem to stand out well.
And this, when people say the blue hare and the mountain hare are one and the same?
Yeah.
And the brown hare are a separate species?
That's right, yeah.
And there was a suggestion, I seem to recall from a programme a while back, that the actual, I think it was the mountain hare, might have actually even been introduced here at some stage.
Yeah, that's definitely the case, or reintroduced. I mean, it's more likely that the brown hare is an introduced species as well, across the whole of Britain. But the blue hare, we know, was reintroduced sometime around the 1950s. In the 1950s, as a game species, and it was initially listed on the Game Act. And then through the course of the 70s, when there was large-scale afforestation going on, lots of upland areas were being planted with conifers. They were obviously seen as an enemy because they'd flourished so well. They were obviously quite keen on nibbling at young trees, so they got put onto the Vermin Act. But we've been looking at for the last few years to try and give them extra protection by putting them back on the Game Act again, which would at least give them a closed season. But we don't think they're heavily exploited. Not from shooting pressure, perhaps some low-scale poaching. But the population seems to, like most upland species, seems to fluctuate markedly year to year.
So it is within the actual timescales when it's legal to go shooting. They are again species they can be taken legally during that window, can they?
Yeah, they can. Yeah, but the vast majority of blue hares are found obviously in the department upland estate. Fewer areas of the uplands where they're found are in private ownership. So our shooting tends to report very low numbers into the bag. I think they have the option to shoot them if they want, but they tend not to in many cases. And
you must see quite a bit when you're out on these hills all the time. Do you see a fair number of them? Do you think their numbers are growing over the years, or do they stay fairly static?
No, they definitely seem to have dropped off, in particular in certain areas. Laxey Hills, they seem to be, the numbers really dropped off there, and again, just across the other side of the road here, the Central Hills, the numbers dropped off, and they haven't really picked up. They're quite stable but low. Here they seem to fluctuate year to year, but last spring when we were carrying out some bird surveys, just on this one walk that we've just done, a line of 4 of us flushed 52 hares, individual hares. So if you think it only took us 5-10 minutes to walk here, it's quite It's quite a lot in this one area.
It's quite a lot.
Yeah.
And any, or have you got any suggestion or any feeling of why the numbers might have dropped over the last few years?
I don't know. Like I say, I think most upland species, whether mammals or birds, can cycle quite a lot. And I think with them being an imported species, maybe seen as an alien species, there hasn't been a great deal of interest in the past. And that's hopefully when we get to have a look at the Game Acts again and realign the species, that maybe people will take a bit more interest in them.
And just the hares again, just finally, if people don't know, what are they, when we say about their sort of grazing up here, were they just sort of grazing on what, like the heather and bits of grass, or what are they sort of, what's their primary diet?
Yeah, they seem to like everything else up here, the diet's limited, but I think they mainly feed on grasses, but they're known to eat quite a lot of blaeberry shoots. They'll certainly eat the heather, the ling heather. Of 3 species of heather, that's the most palatable to most grazing animals. But yeah, they do all right. And it was also worth noting there was quite a lot of people concerned about them through the heavy snow.
Of course, yeah.
But obviously that's what they're made for, and they seem to have made absolutely no difference to them whatsoever. They're really good. That's exactly what they're set up for.
Well, I assume that's it, and that they do go white every year, and some years you see them, they're completely white, and of course there's no snow at all. So, so they're probably celebrating their camouflage was working for
Yeah,
us.
absolutely. Probably winter predation levels were probably at their all-time low this last period.
I'm Gareth Patchett, work for the Water Authority.
Okay, and we were talking, obviously water coming up here, Peter was explaining a bit. I suppose really people might not think about the importance of these areas. We're all too used to just turning on the tap, water comes out, everyone's happy, but these areas play a vital part really as I suppose the primary area where our water first comes in.
Well, Peter encouraged me to come up here today just to see the scale of the hill and the catchment area, and as you rightly said, this Sulby Reservoir is the strategic store of water for the whole island. So I know in my experience, if you get damage like this to the catchments, then when you get heavy rain you get a lot of sediments carried down into the reservoir, which ends up in the treatment works, which ends up in increased costs for us and increased sludge production.
Sure. So these areas are sort of the giant sponge, are they, which sort of collects all the water which heads down towards the Sulby then?
That's right. In the 60s and 70s there was a spate of draining the moorlands to try to foolishly think that you could get more water by draining them, but it led to real problems in the Pennine areas where they got discoloured water and peat washing into the reservoirs. So now very much the practice is to allow nature to take its course and as you say, for them to be sponges but release the water as more water comes into the catchment.
And then so when the water then gets down towards the Sulby, it stops in here, comes down to the Sulby. What actually happens then? Because again, people I suppose have no realistic idea of how it actually works from there. They see the water, they know, they'll be familiar with the Sulby and some of the other reservoirs, but how does it work from there?
Well, Sulby is as it is. It's a reservoir, so it's a stock that allows for peaks and troughs of rainfall. So if we get a dry spell as we did this summer, then the Sulby Reservoir counters the effect of that, and then that water then goes down pipelines to the treatment works at Sulby, and it goes at a constant rate. So we take the same amount of water summer and winter pretty much, and then it goes through the filtration processes and ends up as being drinking water. But the better the raw material is, the easier it is for us to produce the good quality drinking water. Yeah,
that makes sense. So the water at Sulby itself would be sort of in its raw state, as it were. It's just the water that's being collected off these uplands areas and come down into the reservoir there.
Yes, that's right. And because the raw water that comes off these hills is of quite good quality, it makes our life a lot easier to turn it into the drinking water. Mm-hmm. But also the treatment plants that we have are designed specifically for this water. So if the water was to change, the treatment works would have to be changed to suit a different kind of water.
And we're all familiar with maybe in the summer, as you say, if we're lucky enough, which we were this year, to have a prolonged dry spell, and obviously the water gets sort of moved around then. This time of the year, quite the opposite. We can get days or weeks sometimes where we seem to have fairly heavy rain on a regular basis. Does that mean someone like Sulby then, does it reach capacity and has to be sort of drained out, as it were? Well,
when the reservoir is full, it just overflows naturally to the river. So you've got what comes in, goes out. So it becomes as if the reservoir wasn't there at all. So The reservoir sub is also used for generating electricity, so it isn't often that it does overflow. It's a very big reservoir.
It is.
It's a lot bigger than it needs to be for the water supply.
Do we know ballpark billions of litres? I've seen it somewhere, but I can never just wonder whether you had it to hand or not.
No,
big though.
Yes, millions of litres. Yes.
And so again, would it be fair to say that if we didn't have these sort of areas maintained in good condition, as Peter was saying, and we didn't look after them, that would be a serious issue as far as people having clean water coming out of their taps?
That's right. I mean, people would still get clean water coming out of the taps. It would just make us have to, the treatment works have to work harder to produce it. So if you get sediment washed off the hills, that sediment has to be trapped in filters, removed from the water, and it has to be disposed of. So if the hills weren't a natural filter, then there would have to be a man-made filter.
And do people actually, again, people from the Water Authority, do they sort of work sort of hand in glove, or is there's a sort of a combination of work with them working with people from the likes of DEFRA and other departments, actually looking at these areas, maintaining them, making sure that they are, as it were, fit for purpose and are good from the Water Authority point of view?
Absolutely. We work with these guys all the time, and if they notice problems, they come to us, and vice versa. Yeah. And with all the landowners and farmers across the whole catchment.
And again, if nothing else, it's a great excuse. Like today, it's often you go up a walk around the Isle of Man and you seem to be in the middle of nowhere. You'll suddenly find something which will be attached to. You'll see the Water Authority logo there, and
yes.
They're often out in some of the most wildest spots of the Isle of Man, I think.
That's right. And as I say, it's an honour to come up here, really, to be shown this, these guys.
It's amazing. It is amazing the work they do. Right, well, we'll tramp back down as the mist seems to be coming down, so we'll go back down, hopefully find the van in which we came up. I say hopefully. I have every faith in these guys. And here we go. Yeah, I've actually made it back down again and back into just this plethora of different, the heather coming down here, and talking. You just mentioned this grass on the way down as well, which flies away. What do you call it, Sean?
It's Millennia, or purple moorgrass, is no name for it, and it's obviously an important component of the hill in one respect, but it's also a bit dangerous when either the shepherds or the shooting tenants are carrying out the management burning. Because it's another name for it, like I say, is blowgrass, and it's because the dead litter just blows around the wind, and what can happen is the fire's developing and the guys are controlling the sides of the fire. Little bits of that can
go everywhere,
light up and float off and cross the hill. So this is why we have these guidelines, and the guys that do the burning are really experienced. And but if you're burnt on the wrong day, it could certainly get you in an awful lot of trouble, having another 20 or 30 fires all of a sudden going in different areas.
Yes, I could well imagine, and you can just see it as he was talking there. You might have heard it took a handful, and if you have a breeze like today, it just takes off everywhere. You can imagine that was during the burning, some of the legal burning of the areas. Could be a serious problem, so something you don't think about until you come up here. But I'm glad to say we have actually found the van again, which is good.
I think when you look at it as well, landscape value, you look across where we were the first time we come out across the east there and out to Pennypot, and we think even if the peat's only 50 centimetres deep average there, which we're pretty sure probably is most of it. Well, we had a guy do some work for us as well back in the summer, and he was finding it over a metre deep in places. You think if you just look at that now and just try and imagine it as cubic metres of stored carbon, it's quite a
huge
vast area, isn't it? And as well as great big sponge for the water catchment.
So just looking down, as we're coming back to the van, you look down over the valley, and this is all real catchment area when it comes to getting the water in.
That's right, vast
it
area.
Is huge. We're talking about massive areas really here, and you don't. Again, it's one of these things you just don't really appreciate unless you come out, and particularly with the guys who know what they're talking about and really see the areas and think about how much importance there is in this area. Again, not just for the wildlife, not just for those who graze it, work it, enjoy the recreation, but again this importance of maintaining and looking after the upland areas for our generation and the next, of course. And things like water, you wouldn't think about it, would you? You wouldn't think about it probably, but absolutely vital. And I just think so interesting and important to come out and see these things firsthand.
that's it for this week's Man in the Wild. I do hope you've enjoyed the programme, and we'll see you again, same time, same place, next week. Cheerio.